super excited to be here. This is going to be a fun class. We're going to move pretty fast. I think we only have an hour together. And we're going to make two really popular Swedish fika treats today. If you're not familiar with the term fika, it basically means coffee break. And it's something that they do not only in Sweden, but throughout Scandinavia as just part of their daily culture. So ideally, you would take a coffee break in the late morning and then again in the afternoon. You may be doing this with your colleagues, with your family, just by yourself, but it's something that's kind of expected and celebrated as part of your sort of day-to-day life. And ideally, with your coffee, you're going to have a little something sweet to kind of perk you up for that, late afternoon or morning slump. So hence the cookies or a little piece of cake, whatever is around and sweet and delicious is perfect to go with your cup of coffee. So these are two types of cookies that you'll find in bakeries and cafes and homes throughout Sweden. So we're going to make raspberry hazelnut thumbprint cookies. They are called Hallongrottor in Swedish. That means raspberry caves. There's probably, if you speak Swedish, I apologize it's because I do not speak Swedish very well. So if it doesn't sound like I'm, doing it justice, I apologize. And then the second one we're going to make is a no-bake Swedish chocolate oat ball, and that's known as a Chokladbollar. And those are also extremely popular. I was in Stockholm in November, and everywhere we went, we pretty much saw both of these types of cookies in nearly every cafe that we visited. And we did visit a lot of cafes. So I did my homework. Just to kind of get things started, making sure that you have your oven set at 350 if you're baking along with me today. And we're going to just start by getting our hazelnuts in the oven. So hazelnuts have a skin on them. They are very difficult to remove. And so we are going to start by roasting these. And that's not only going to sort of intensify the flavor of our hazelnuts in our cookie, it's going to help us remove these skins. And so I'm going to show you kind of a little trick to kind of help that along. So I'm going to pop these in. I think the recipe says 10 minutes. I think I'm just going to put them in for about 8, just because we're kind of, working under a shorter timeline today. And that'll give us enough time to kind of get things going. Okay, perfect. And that was 3/4 cup of hazelnuts. If you do not have a food processor, I had this question come in a couple of times over the week. You could just use like a ground almond flour. That would be just fine here. That's just basically ground almonds. You could find ground hazelnut flour. I've seen it. It's not very common, but you could just buy that and then skip this step of roasting and grinding the hazelnuts. So just to kind of give you some options depending on what your equipment or situation is. So
if somebody had fresh almonds or fresh walnuts, would they be able to use those?
Absolutely. You could definitely substitute either one of those for the hazelnut. Absolutely. They would both be really tasty.
Excellent. Thanks.
Yeah. While those are roasting, I was going to tell you first. So since we were sharing sort of our favorite baking memories, I was kind of thinking about mine. And I think mine is probably when I used to come home from school it was always in November, right before Thanksgiving. And my grandpa would visit. He was Norwegian, and he and my mom would be making lefse. And it was like that huge day project where they made lefse, I don't know how many pieces of lefse, but enough to get us through the holiday season. And then we would freeze them and then enjoy it at Easter. So it was quite a bit. But that fresh lefse, there's just nothing like it. No one ever let me be a part of the baking project. I just ate it. And I just remember that really well. It's a really fond memory. I now make my own lefse, but when I was little, I was just allowed to watch and eat. So, yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
All right. Another question in the chat about substitutions. If somebody is using almond meal or almond flour, how much do they use? Because 3/4 of a cup of whole hazelnuts isn't going to grind down to exactly 3/4 of a cup.
Right. I would say, I think you would be safe to go with like a scant 3/4 cup. I think that's probably what I'd start with. I didn't do the exact measurement, but because the nuts are a little fattier to begin with, I think that a little bit more or less will be okay in our dough. It's not going to make it dry, if that makes sense.
Fantastic.
So I'm comfortable with that. Okay, perfect. So while that is happening, I am going to just kind of move ahead to the creaming stage of our butter and sugar, and then we'll kind of go back and grind our hazelnuts once they come out of the oven. So I'm going to grab my mixer, and if you don't have a mixer, you could totally do this by hand. I'm almost always going to use my mixer because, you know, I have it and I love it. If you've never taken a class with me before, I have to start by pointing out this little item I have that I love. It's called a side swipe. They don't pay me to advertise for them, but I just always have to tell people about it. It is a paddle attachment that works with my KitchenAid, and it has these little fins. And the fins act like a rubber spatula while it's in the bowl. And so I don't really have to scrape the bowl down as I'm going. And I love it. I think it is a worthwhile investment if you are a frequent baker. I used to buy them on Amazon, but recently they haven't been carrying them, and I've had to buy them directly from the Side Swipe website. But they are available, and I have tried some of the other brands, and they're not as good. So definitely seek out the Side Swipe.
Excellent.
Yes. Okay, so I'm starting with just a half cup or 8 tablespoons of unsalted butter. I don't always bake with unsalted butter just because I want to be able to control the amount of salt in my recipe. And the amount of salt in a stick of butter can really vary, and it can really kind of, make a difference in terms of the final product, if you're adding more salt to your recipe and you're starting with a salted butter. So the easiest way to sort of make sure that you kind of have the most control over that is to just start with the unsalted butter. And then I have a 1/3 cup of granulated sugar, and I'm going to just mix this until it's light and fluffy. This is pretty much standard. I'm going to just keep going. So if you can still hear me, this is pretty standard cooking recipe. So we start by creaming the butter and sugar together. And then we'll slowly add the flour in at the very end.
Kristi, I think I lied to you. I think I lied to you when I said it was going to be safe to talk over the mixer. It's garbling more than it ever has before. So that's totally an Andrew fault, not Kristi's fault. So you can tell us about the creaming it after it's done creaming. Sorry.
No, it's okay. We will just watch it cream together and then we'll chat about it. So Here we go. So I'm going to do I usually start on medium and just till everything comes together. And then I'll move it up to medium high to really get things going. And because I'm using my side swipe and it's kind of clearing the sides of the bowl as I go, it moves a little bit faster than if I had to stop and scrape down occasionally. So if you don't have, obviously, a tool like this, feel free to stop and scrape down as needed. And we'll just kind of see each other on the other side here. So hang on. Here we go. Okay, that was about 2 minutes. And I don't know if you can see that, but it's almost like, from my perspective, like a very pale yellow, almost white color now. And it started out much more of a traditional sort of yellow butter color. And that just happens as a result of the air whipping into the butter with the sugar. And it's kind of created sort of a light and fluffy sort of mixture now. And I'm going to just set that aside while we keep going with our hazelnuts, because they are about ready to come out of the oven.
Fantastic.
Yes.
We have a couple folks that are cooking along with their kids today, which is so exciting. We are delighted to have families baking together. So as you hit steps that seem especially young baker friendly, will you point those out for us?
I definitely will. And I was thinking, well, actually, when I said that, and I think I said this at the very beginning, that I was adding a half cup or a stick of butter. But in my recipe, I say 8 tablespoons of unsalted butter. And I thought, what a great little math learning opportunity. So 16 tablespoons of butter, or 16 tablespoons of anything, are in a cup. So you can always kind of figure things out and kind of divide by whatever you need to figure out the number of tablespoons that are needed in a recipe. So if I say a half cup, then you just divide that 16 by 2 and you get 8 tablespoons. So
fantastic.
All
we
sorts
have
of fun math.
In the chat. Somebody's asking if the recipes will be available later. They should be in the email that was sent to you that had this Zoom link, but once this gets added to YouTube, we will also link them in the YouTube class description, just so that you can find them anytime you want to.
I'm going to make my daughter come here because she's in the room and she's my family baker. Come over and say hi. This is Emma.
Hi, Emma. It's great to meet you. Thanks for sharing your mom with us.
She is too busy to bake with us today. She has the essay to write. Oh, yeah. Okay. She's out. The busy junior in high school.
Love it. Love it.
I'm going to take my hazelnuts. So they're really warm. So I'm using my mitt. And I'm going to just pour them onto a plain dish towel. Ideally, your dish towel will be the type of more like a tea towel that doesn't have any like terry cloth on it, that sort of thing. And they're just going to sit inside of this towel for a couple of minutes here. And it's going to sort of steam. That heat is just going to steam inside of the towel, and that's going to help loosen those skins. And we're not going to get all the skins off. That's almost an impossible task. And that's totally fine. Like, we will grind up some of them and that will be great. But if we can get some of them off, I feel good about that. So I'm going to just go ahead and start rubbing. You guys can see this, right? And my little, yes, you can. So I'm just kind of rubbing those hazelnuts inside the towel. And that's going to help those skins come off. And you can get really obsessive about it and try to get them all off, but I have never been successful getting them all off. Oops, they're trying to sneak away from me here. As you can see, I'm going to lift that up. You can see all the skins that have come off already.
Wow.
Yeah, it really does make a difference. And it's almost, seriously, there is not a much better way to do it. They're very difficult to remove otherwise.
This feels like a great step for kids to help with.
This is a great kiddo step. Absolutely. One, or probably more than once, I have set these aside and then kind of forgotten about them and then thought it was just a towel. I grabbed it and then hazelnuts everywhere. So don't do that. And I think I did it while I was teaching. Maybe it was for the Vesterheim. I don't remember, but hazelnuts everywhere.
Amazing.
Okay.
There are a couple questions in the chat. Will the skins stain the towel?
No, I've never had them stain the towel. Okay. I will go outside or somewhere where I feel comfortable shaking out my towel. I'll give it a good shake. And then I'll just toss it in the laundry and they come out clean. So, yeah.
And then I'm assuming this recipe doubles well. Is there a max number of batches that you would recommend doing at the same time, knowing that you have the fresh hazelnuts in there? Or is it okay to double or triple at will?
At the very least, I would say double is more than fine. I've never tried tripling before, but I don't know why that wouldn't work. I think you would just fine. As long as you have the mixer capacity and the processor capacity if you're using the food processor piece of it.
Yeah, fantastic.
Okay, so I'm going to grab my food processor here. Okay, and you guys can see that. I'm just going to pop these in. They're still a little bit warm, but they cool down pretty fast. And you will be rewarded for this little effort of roasting and grinding your own nuts. It really does bring out a nice hazelnut flavor that you would not otherwise get.
My sister lives in Oregon, so we often get hazelnuts as part of care packages, and this is definitely going to be something that I try the next time we get a bag.
That sounds lovely. Do they come in the shell?
No, they're already shelled, but many of them have the skin still on, so we have to go through the roasting process.
Right? You'll be able to tell everyone that trick. So in the recipe, I say to add the flour and salt right away. I'm going to just get them started, and then I'm going to add the flour. So bear with me here, because this is going to be noisy again. I'm going to just start grinding these away. Okay, I'm just wanting to get them started. And if you are doing this, they smell amazing. So, so nice. And so this is, like I said, not done at this point. This is just sort of roughly chopped. So I'm going to add my 1 cup of flour. And that's just regular all-purpose flour. And I have a 1/4 teaspoon of fine salt. And when I say fine salt, that just means your standard sort of basic salt, as opposed to like a coarse or kosher salt. So this is just sort of like your Morton salt, something like that. Okay, so I'm going to put that back in. And then we're going to grind away some more until things are nice and smooth. Okay, so now you can kind of see that this really just looks like flour now. And when I pick it up, I can still feel a little bit of hazelnut, but it's relatively finely ground. I might just give it one more go. That looks great. I mean, it doesn't really, it's not a big deal if your like hazelnuts aren't completely finely ground. They'll just be a little bit more noticeable in the dough, but that's not necessarily a bad thing. So I'm just going to set that aside, and we're going to go back to our mixer, moving this out of the way. Okay, so we talked a little bit about creaming, and that's sort of how you start off most cookie recipes, by creaming the sugar and the butter together, getting everything all light and fluffy. For this particular recipe, we're only going to use the egg yolk. And that is sort of, it does a couple of different things. It really creates a really nice rich dough. It's a little less there's a little less structure because the white sort of provides the protein and structure. And that's kind of a good thing when we want a soft cookie. So I thought we would kind of go over like my favorite way to separate the yolk and the white. There's a lot of different ways to do this. I know when I was a kid, my mom would crack it and then she would kind of go back and forth between the shells. And that's a good way to do it. The only problem I run into with that is that sometimes the yolk is pierced, and because it's got a sharp edge on that shell, if that makes sense. That's a little more likely to happen. So my personal favorite way to do it is to just crack the egg, and then I will just, hopefully this works. I have a sink here. I can put it in my hands, and I let the white just run through my fingers.
Huh.
And that is my favorite way to do it. If I wanted to save the white, I would just do this over a bowl. Obviously, my hands are clean. Important tip, yes. So there's my yolk. It's all ready to go. So we're just going to put that in. I'm going to rinse my hands.
Oh, Kristi, Linda has shared in the chat a hilarious story. Her very first bread baking was in third grade, and it happened when her mom gave her the recipe and said, "Don't make the water too hot, it'll kill the yeast." And then her mom went down to do laundry. That was the extent of the instruction on baking bread that she got.
That's awesome. I that's just there's so much more, right? You're like, okay, that sounds perfect. That's hilarious. I've got a half teaspoon of vanilla here, and then a quarter teaspoon of almond extract. I like using both. It makes for a really nice flavor. So funny. I'm such a micromanager in the kitchen. I can't even imagine sending my kids off with sort of like instructions. But sometimes I think that might be the best way to learn. You kind of probably have to figure it out on your own, and there's nothing wrong with that either. Okay, that's just a quarter teaspoon of the almond extract. We're going to mix that. So back with our mixing here. So I'm going to go to about, I would say, medium speed. And I don't need to do anything other than to get everything incorporated at this point. No, like light and fluffy, just everything just uniformly incorporated. Okay, perfect. That's all there is to it. If you are baking along with me, you probably noticed that you can smell that almond extract like immediately as you start whipping everything together. Almond extract has a very strong flavor. So compared with vanilla, we are always probably going to use less of the almond because it's so prominent and so it's just stronger than the vanilla. So I'm going to add, sorry, what did you say?
I was just going to say that makes sense.
Yes, big time. So I've got our sort of hazelnut and flour and salt mixture here, and I'm going to add this in with our butter. And then we're just going to slowly combine this until it just comes together. And we're going to talk a little bit about why that is. So when we are making a dough or a cake batter, anything like that, whenever we have like sort of wet ingredients and we start adding something that has flour in it, so something that has gluten, we want to make sure that we're using sort of a careful, gentle hand as we stir them together, because once the flour comes into contact with any kind of liquid, including like our butter mixture here, gluten is going to start to form. And gluten strands are kind of that strong sort of structure that keeps your baked goods together. And we want a little bit of that because we want our cookies to, be a cookie, but we still want them to be nice and tender and soft. And if we went crazy and mixed our flour and our wet ingredients together, our cookies would turn out tough. And that's definitely not what we're looking for. And you can kind of contrast this with when you make bread, for example. So when you're making bread, you do want to work the dough and you are like kneading and you're trying to create more of a gluten structure so that your bread has sort of that opportunity to rise. So just think about it as like whenever you want something to be soft and tender, just use that sort of soft, gentle stirring when you're combining the wet and dry together. If you are working entirely with gluten-free ingredients, it wouldn't matter. Then you would be able to, you could mix as much as you wanted and you would never have that problem. So I'm going to add this in. Yeah, gluten is a very interesting thing. Some of mine is stuck, so I'm going to just scrape it out. That looks great. Okay. So this time I'm just going to go real slow, nice and slow on low. Okay, I'm going to call that good. So now it just looks like a cookie dough, but just looks like a cookie dough. I did not stir forever and ever. And I'm going to actually when I take this off, and I kind of have to scrape the dough off of the dough, off of the, what's the word I'm looking for? Paddle attachment. I'm going to kind of gently stir it with my rubber spatula to just get any bits together that are still maybe a little floury. That way I'm not over mixing with the mixer itself. When I was in cooking school, the first unit you do in your basic baking class is like quick breads and muffins. And that's a really good way to kind of learn about that gentle hand, because if you make, and you'll probably notice this if you start looking, if you make a batch of muffins, for example, and you over stir, there'll be little tunnels almost in your baked goods, and you kind of like open them up. And instead of having a kind of uniform crumb, you'll see sort of little tunnels, and that's sort of the baking soda or powder kind of working its way through the gluten structure. And that is not what you want. And that is not something that's going to get you an A on that muffin test. So next time you make muffins at home, just kind of, you can test yourself, see how your crumb looks once you bake them. Okay, so I'm going to move my mixer aside. And you guys can see, here's my dough, which looks awesome. I'm just getting there with my hands. It's nice and soft. And we, you kind of can sort of eliminate some of the gluten problem just by adding something like a ground nut to a cookie, because obviously the nuts don't have gluten. And so it does help keep the cookie more soft and tender, just, sort of using that in addition with all-purpose flour in the first place. So just something to think about. Okay, so for shaping our cookies, these all just look really pretty. And now I just, as I was walking over, they all went all over the place. Okay, so these are mini muffin cups. And you can make these without the cups. That's fine too. They're more traditional to be served or to be baked in the cups in Sweden. In Sweden, in fact, and I did not know this until I went, they are using more of a traditional sized muffin cup.
Wow.
And so, yes, their Hallongrottor are huge. And I was surprised because, I don't know, when I think of a cookie, I don't think of them as being as big as a muffin,
That feels like a tart then.
Yeah, exactly. They almost did have more of a tart-like appearance. So I like the little cookie. I think it's a nice little bite-sized treat. But if you wanted to play around with making them big, you sure could. Might have to adjust your baking time a little bit, but I'm sure it could be done.
Fun.
Okay, so I'm going to just take my dough and just start rolling it into little balls. I've got about a tablespoon size. I don't know if you can see, just enough to kind of fit inside one of my little cups. And I'm just
Kristi, there's
gonna
a question about how big the little muffin cups are. What's the diameter across, would you say?
I would say they're about 1.5 inches.
Okay, perfect.
So they're like, if you bought, I think when you buy them, it just says like they're for mini muffin tins. So
Okay. Yep.
Look for that.
And then Karen is asking, she has been told in the past for scones to refrigerate the dough to help break down the gluten structure.
Mm-hmm.
And she's wondering if somebody were to think they maybe had overmixed the dough, would refrigerating it help get that gluten structure knocked back a notch?
That's a good question. I think with something like scones, because like with a scone or a biscuit, instead of doing this sort of a mixing method, you're cutting the butter into the dough. So like when you make pie crust, it's a similar process.
Yep.
So rather than truly mixing the butter, you're cutting it.
Okay.
And definitely scones and biscuits, if they are chilled, again, after you've been working with the dough and the dough has had a chance to get warm, if it firms up again before baking, you will end up with a more tender scone or biscuit.
Uh-huh.
Don't know if that would translate necessarily to the cookies because of the fact that you've already done the mixing.
Got it.
So hopefully that helps.
Yeah.
Okay.
Absolutely.
So I'm going to just make 12 of these to start because you can fit about 12 onto each tray. And this should make about 2 trays worth. So if you were just making these without the muffin cups, which again, totally fine. And in fact, that's how I started making these. And they're still super tasty. They're going to get a little bit more crisp than if you use the little liner. And there's something really delightful about the protection that the little paper will offer the outside of the cookie. And just kind of is really soft and tender. These are, as you can tell, I'm like really excited for making these today. I love these cookies.
Yay.
Yeah, they're one of my favorites. I can't resist them. This is it's
when you were baking all the time for this to make your top list, that's a very high praise.
Absolutely. And I think that when you have this is your job, I don't bake as much for myself, so to speak, as I used to. And
Right.
so, yes, when some of my favorites come back into the rotation, I'm like, yes, this is awesome. I'm so excited we're making these today.
I love it.
Yeah. And sometimes I share, I did a waffle class last week, and I shared my waffles with the neighbors and everything, but I'm not sharing these.
These are only for you.
I'll share them with my immediate family, but the neighbors, they're not getting these today. Sorry. They're very
We have a running line in our family. My mom is a chocoholic. And when she would get a bar of fancy chocolate when we were kids, when we would go out on a big fancy outing someplace, go to the Twin Cities from our small town, she would get a bar of chocolate and it might have like 6 squares of chocolate. And I would get 1 square and my sister would get 1 square. And she would say, I will share, but I won't be fair.
Yeah,
She's the other 4 for herself.
I love that. I can relate to that. Yes. So many times, especially when you're the mom in the family, I feel like you're sharing everything all the time. And sometimes it's okay to just be like, no, this one's for me.
Yep.
Exactly.
I love it. Okay, so the ball rolling is probably another great place for kids to be helping a lot.
Oh, 100%. Yes. And it's a really easy dough to work with. Some doughs you really have to let chill before you start rolling, but this is not going to stick to your hands. It's just extremely easy to work with. And that's partially thanks to, we have like a lot of butter going here. And again, we're working with that hazelnut, ground hazelnut, which is adding some more sort of fat to the dough. I just made that one a tiny bit smaller because I felt like he was a little big. Okay, so I have 12 balls, which is perfect. And I've got enough dough here to last about half, I would say. I say it makes 26, and that's going to sort of, depend on how big your cookies are. But you'll get around 24, I would say, at the end of the day. So I'm going to use a round teaspoon. This is just an actual teaspoon measure, and it's round. And if you don't have a round teaspoon measure, you can either find a similar shaped spoon in your kitchen. Everybody's got something that'll work. Or you could actually use your thumb, hence the term thumbprint. That is where the term came from. So if you want to go ahead and just use your finger, that'll work too. And I'm going to go ahead and just kind of press down in the center. So like that. And it's not going to stay because as it bakes, and I'll probably come in with my hand a little bit and kind of reinforce that, it's going to puff up a little bit as it bakes. And that's fine because we're going to wash our spoon and we're going to come back in and do this again once they're baked and they're still warm to sort of reinforce that divot. Huh? That way we get enough or as much raspberry filling as we can, because that is we like the raspberry. If you did not like raspberry for some reason, if you were like, not so much, you could obviously do like a strawberry jam. That would be really tasty in these cookies. Otherwise, you could do lemon curd. That would be super yummy.
I bet lingonberries would be delicious too.
Yes, that would be so nice.
Now the Holmgren family is just saying in the chat, we're using lingonberries.
Of course they are.
Wonderful.
Love my Scandinavian people who just have these around, right? Everybody else is like, what are lingonberries?
Meatball Monday. You never know.
There you go. That sounds amazing. So yeah, you kiddos, absolutely. This would be another great little job for the kiddos. It just takes a little bit of finesse, but not much, to kind of press down. I mean, you just really want to think about it as a home for the raspberry jam. So we like whatever that means to you, just so you're making a little spot for it to go. That looks great. And then I'm going to pop these into that 350-degree oven for 16 to 18 minutes. And when they come out, as I said, we're going to reinforce the divot with our spoon, which we're going to wash in between, because right now this is not clean. And then we're going to fill it with a little bit of that raspberry jam. And I'm going to just set that other dough aside for now, and we can kind of return to the as we're kind of working our way through the baking process, or even on the other side of class. But we're going to turn our attention while these are in the oven to making those no-bake chocolate oat balls. Ooh. So let me slide these in. And if there's any questions about the cookies, please let me know.
I haven't seen any additional questions come in, but Linda shared that her mom was a librarian. This is Linda, who learned to bake from the recipe card and the word of warning about the hot water. Her mom was a librarian, and her theory was that if she learned how to read directions and follow them, then she could get a book and teach herself anything she wanted to learn.
I think that's so true. I mean,
Isn't that great? Yeah.
And I think that as adults, maybe we come to that naturally, but what a great lesson to learn when you're younger,
Absolutely. Beth is asking if it was a teaspoon or a tablespoon that you were using to press with.
It was a teaspoon.
Okay.
Yeah. Perfect. So I'm going to just switch out my bowl real quick here and wash my hands. So you need to really kind of catch up. Okay, so this was another really, really popular recipe when I was in Sweden. And the Hallongrottor, these were huge. They were like almost like bigger than a golf ball huge at the bakeries. I was like, who is eating that? That thing is enormous. But and if you want to make yours really huge, you go right ahead. I'm going to do mine a little bit smaller because that's kind of I can eat more of them that way. Maybe that's the way to look at it.
I like it.
But this is a super fun recipe for kids because there's nothing in it that can't be eaten raw, technically, because it's a no-bake treat. So sometimes, we don't want to, eat the dough because there's raw eggs or raw flour, but this one is meant to be raw. So it's kind of fun. We can just sort of eat as we go if we want to. So we're going to just go ahead and get started with our cocoa powder. I'm going to actually move this aside for a sec. So a word about cocoa powder. You see here, this is mine. This is a Dutch processed cocoa powder. And I don't know if you can tell, it's darker. There are two different kinds of cocoa powder when you go to the store. So you have, this is sort of your traditional cocoa. This is a Trader Joe's brand, unsweetened cocoa powder. It would be the same thing as buying like the traditional Hershey's cocoa at the store. And then there's Dutch processed cocoa. And that is, they make one from Hershey's. It's called the Special Dark. And it says here in tiny writing, Dutch cocoa. And Dutch cocoa has been treated, it's been, neutralized. So cocoa powder is very acidic. And the cocoa powder that they use, and it's typically something that's used in Europe, has been treated so that it's not acidic anymore. So it's darker in color, but it's actually milder in flavor. And it makes a really nice cocoa powder for baking. So if I were using regular cocoa powder that was not Dutch processed, it would be best if I included some baking soda in my recipe. And that's because baking soda does that same job. It will do that job of neutralizing the acid. But if you're using that Dutch processed cocoa, you don't have to worry about it, and you're going to have a smoother, milder cocoa to begin with. So just a little tip when you're shopping for cocoa, if you want to start stocking both, I think that's a great idea. Or quite honestly, the dark Dutch processed cocoa can work in absolutely any recipe and give you great results. If you are using traditional cocoa powder today, that is totally fine and that will work just fine. But I just kind of wanted to walk you through those two differences because I think it's interesting and just something good to know as a baker. Right. I have 3 tablespoons of the cocoa. And I'm going to use coffee. If you don't want to use coffee, you could just use warm water here, or even just a little bit of milk. The cocoa and the coffee together kind of are a nice combination. They don't really have much of a coffee flavor at the very end. So it's up to you. I like the coffee. If the coffee is traditional, you'll find that in Scandinavian recipes, but again, totally up to you. I am going to add a teaspoon of vanilla. This is a half teaspoon measure, so I'm going to add 2. And then I'm just going to stir that together. And it's just going to make kind of like a paste.
Is the goal to get the cocoa powder completely dissolved?
It's going to be kind of thick. So
Okay.
just almost like get it wet, maybe is the best way to say it. It's going to be a really thick paste at this point, and that is just fine because we are going to actually mix it in with our other ingredients. And if you're mixing by hand, that is totally fine. I'm going to use my mixer for this. So I have a clean bowl. I'm going to set that little cocoa mixture aside, grab my mixer, clean bowl. And we're going to do that same cream. But again, I've got my half cup butter. We remember how many tablespoons are in this?
That would be 8. I paid attention.
That's right. You know your math. Okay, and I've got the sugar. So this time we're working with a half cup of granulated sugar. So equal amounts of sugar and butter. And I have a half teaspoon of salt. I pretty much never don't include salt in a sweet recipe. And I've talked about this before. If you've taken classes from me, salt really neutralizes sort of that super sweet flavor and kind of balances out the sweetness in your recipe. And it kind of rounds out that mouthfeel so that when you're eating it, it's almost like heightened in flavor because you have the salt and the sweet, and it's not overly salty. It's just enough to sort of enhance the sweetness, if that makes sense. I'm going to grab my boring old pal attachment. The other one's 30.
Your kitchen with 2 bowls, but only 1 side swipe, huh?
I'm not going to do that anymore. I'm going to have to get another one. I'm addicted to that side swipe. It is just so nice. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and come back to our light and fluffy here. So back to medium speed. We're going to scrape down the sides because we have to. Probably good we do this both ways. One cookie one way and one way.
It's interesting to see the difference.
Yeah, seriously. It's a little selling point for my side swipe. Okay, back we go. I'm going to do one more.
Kristi, while you're scraping,
Yeah.
Sue is asking, what is the addition to neutralize the regular cocoa versus the Dutch? And how much of it would you recommend adding?
So in it, like I definitely wouldn't add it in a recipe like this because we're not baking it.
Okay.
But if you were using it in a regular recipe, it's baking soda. So baking powder won't do that. It's only baking soda. And I would probably replace, or you could even just add to, like if your recipe is like a teaspoon of baking powder and there's no baking soda in it, you could just add a half teaspoon of baking soda in addition to the baking powder, and that would do the job.
Okay, got it. But that only works if you're baking.
Yes. So
today,
like you will be fine because we're not baking. You'll be fine to just be using it as is. Absolutely.
Okay. Great. Thanks.
Okay, that looks pretty white, pretty light pale yellow. So I'm going to take my mixture, my cocoa mixture, and I'm going to scrape that in.
And you're scraping it right onto the paddle.
Yeah, I am, just because it's a little bit easier to get it off that way. And then we'll kind of work and see how much it comes off as it's mixing, and we may have to help it, but it's a little easier than scraping it to the side of the bowl where you know it's gonna
absolutely
need extra help to begin with. And then I'm going to add 2 cups of oats that I processed in the food processor earlier. You can buy instant oats that are basically the same thing as chopping up larger oats in your food processor. They're the same kind of oats you would find in a little package of oatmeal that's like pre-flavored, but they do sell them unflavored as well. I mean, you could just use old-fashioned oats as they are. I just like the texture of them a little bit more broken up. So mine aren't completely broken up. You can kind of see them here. There are some whole oats. There are some smaller oat shards. That I think is a nice sort of mixture for what we're going for here. But really either one will work. I add a little bit of these chopped chocolate chips. And again, I just ran those through the food processor until they were broken down a bit. And this is not traditional necessarily. I just figured that while I had the mixer or the food processor out, I was like, I'm going to just throw in a little bit of chopped chocolate that, heighten the chocolate flavor. You could totally leave that extra chocolate out. It's just a little embellishment that I've added to my recipe. So that's kind of, your choice. So I'm going to go ahead and mix this. Something to think about. So we had our gluten conversation earlier. Oats do not have gluten. They are gluten-free. So we can mix away and we're not going to cause any problems here. So we don't have to worry about the slow mixing. That looks pretty good. I'm going to scrape off whatever is left here on my paddle. It's not much. I'll give it another whirl.
Question from the chat. If somebody had mini chocolate chips, would that be okay instead of throwing chocolate chips into the food processor?
100%. I like your style. That totally works. I've been thinking as I was talking to my husband earlier today, I think that I should make a peanut butter version of these because why not, right?
Yes.
I think that's amazing. Okay, back in we go. Okay, that looks great. And that's all there is to it. That is about the easiest cookie dough in the world. They always say in all the Swedish baking books that this is the first recipe that most Swedish children will learn to make because it's so simple and they can eat the dough. So and you don't even have to turn the oven on. I mean, you're really we could give our kids this recipe card and be like, here, go make this. And they probably could. Yes. So I'm going to get another baking sheet just to show you how it would work from here. And you can kind of make these at your leisure. I'm going to take my rings off because chocolate. And if this is too sticky, if you're like, too sticky, Kristi, you can always pop it in the fridge for a little bit. Mine, it's pretty easy to work with. I'm just rolling it into a ball. And then from here, I'm going to take something pretty and I'm going to roll it in that. So for me, I'm using sprinkles, some colorful sprinkles. And then onto the baking sheet. Or, honestly, a plate might be a better choice because you're going to want to chill these before you eat them because they're going to be pretty squishy at first. And they'll be super tasty and go ahead and eat them. But for long-term storage, and if you wanted to serve these to guests, I think they're nicer chilled. So kind of keep that in mind as you're choosing a plate to put them on. Okay, that is our cookies. I'm going to grab those. So you kind of get the idea on this. We'll come back to this in a sec, but that's really all there is to it. You can do sprinkles as your outside coating. You could do pearl sugar. You could do coconut flakes. That's something you'll see quite often. Anything that you think sounds like a tasty and pretty little, outer coating will be great.
So many possibilities.
So many possibilities. Okay, so here are my cookies. They are sort of light brown, just around the edges. You can see what I was saying. So it's puffed up a bit in the center just from the baking. And that's fine. I'm going to grab that clean spoon. So again, part of going to cooking and baking school is learning about food safety. So that is why I'm always going to grab a clean spoon because I don't want to contaminate my cooked cookies with my raw dough spoon that I used from before, because that is just, something to kind of think about. But you'll see that as I press, that's just going to sort of increase that divot, and it's going to make a better home for our raspberry jam. And if I tried to do this, say in 5 minutes, it wouldn't work so well. Because right now these cookies are still soft, they're still malleable, but they will get to a point where they're not going to do this for you. So it's good to work kind of quickly at this point.
So this would be one where it's probably better to bake them one pan at a time instead of doing the double or triple batch all going in the oven at the same time then.
Yes, that's probably a good point, unless you have lots of hands and lots of spoons.
Well, that's true.
Depending on your crew that's with you today.
Unleash a fleet of grandchildren with teaspoons.
Yes. Everybody can have their own pan. Okay, so we're going to let these cool. They're too hot to fill right now because they are just out of the oven. But we have done that step of making that divot, and that's really what we wanted to do while they were warm. So I'm going to move these off to the side, and I'm going to show you how to make the raspberry jam filling. And there's really nothing to it. So I have a 3/4 cup of jam. Show you here. I played around with using different types of jam in this recipe. I am using a Trader Joe's. They have a raspberry preserves. I'm just looking for the jar, but I don't see it out here right now. But it's extremely seedy, and that I don't like. That is not something that I like in my cookies. If you don't mind the seeds, and not everybody does, you can go ahead and just use the jam straight up. But I want to be able to strain my jam just so I can get rid of those seeds. I have also tried just starting with seedless jam, and that is a nice option. I just don't think the flavor is as good as using more of like a high quality jam that has the seeds. So just to make everyone's life a little bit more difficult, I'm going to use this seeded jam and then strain it because I think that is going to bring the best flavor. So I'm just going to heat this on the stove. You can heat it in the microwave too, but I just want to get it to the point where it's bubbling. And then it's going to be a lot easier once it's warm. It's going to sort of loosen up and be a lot easier to kind of work its way through that fine mesh strainer, leaving the seeds behind. So does anyone have questions while I'm just gonna stir this, but
yeah, absolutely. I was just gonna say, I have noticed as you've been baking today that for everything except like the liquid things like the vanilla extract, everything else has been pre-measured. Is that a tip that you would give to young bakers as they're getting started? Like, is pre-measuring an important part?
You're just speaking my language right now. Look at me. I'm like, oh, yes, I do recommend that. In cooking school, that's called mise en place. And it's a French term that means everything in its place. And that's how you learn to cook in a traditional setting, because the more organized you are, the more that you have everything prepped and ready, the less likely you are to make a mistake, the more in control of your space that you'll feel, and the more efficiently you'll be able to move in the kitchen. So I'm 100% all about mise en place, not only in the kitchen, but just as a way of life, more that you can sort of prep your world and make your life easier. Just, that is just great advice all the way around. But you will find if you take the time to do that in the kitchen, I mean, even if you're making dinner and you start kind of with that mise en place idea and getting everything kind of ready to go, and then launching into the recipe itself and the cooking, you will feel just, it just brings a lot of joy, I think, to the cooking process and takes out a lot of stress, if you will.
Excellent. Trish is asking, what temp is your jam being heated at? Is it medium, high?
So I have mine at medium because this particular burner on my stove is not super hot. If I had a hotter, like if I was using my hotter burner, I would probably be working at maybe a medium low. All I want to do is get it to bubble. So I don't want to scorch it either. So I think, maybe erring on the side of not super hot.
Great.
So like my jam is already becoming much more of a liquid than when I started, because it's just starting to heat up. It really doesn't take long. And if I find as I'm like working my way through the cookies and maybe I, used up more jam than I thought I was going to, you can always just like throw a little bit more on the stove and make some more. 3/4 cup usually gets me through a full batch, but you can always make more. Any other questions?
It's been pretty quiet in the chat. I think between the instructions you've been giving and the recipes you sent ahead of time, people are feeling like they know what they need to know.
That's awesome. And I will go back to our unbaked cookies really quick. I just have a couple of other shaping tips for you as you're kind of starting to work with those. And if you're like, I'm going to finish these raspberry cookies and then I'm going to tackle the rest of the no-bake cookies, that's great. And just cover the mixture for the no-bake cookies and pop it in the fridge. And then whenever you're ready to tackle it again, bring it out. But I will tell you that once that butter starts to harden in the fridge, it's going to be harder to roll. So you may just have to let it warm up a little bit, but no problems.
So cooling it a little bit makes it less sticky to your hands, but too much makes it too difficult.
Exactly. That's exactly right.
Got it.
It's bubbling. So.
Hooray.
Great. I'm going to just show you what it looks like. So compared to where I started, this is just like almost like a complete liquid. And that is just going to make my life so much easier when I run this through a fine mesh strainer. And maybe you're the kind of person who makes jam at home or, preserves, and you've got something homemade. And obviously, if you're using like lingonberry preserves, I would just go straight up with those. I wouldn't bother to heat and strain necessarily because they don't really have seeds. You do you.
I love that.
Yes, I do too. That is what being your own cook and baker is all about. You do you.
Okay,
So,
as you're pressing that through, a couple questions about chocolate. The first one, can the no-bake Swedish chocolate oat ball be frozen? How long do they store at room temperature? How long do they store in the fridge? If they can be frozen, how long do they store in the freezer?
those are all super good questions. I would say I have never tried to freeze them, but I'm sure they would freeze just fine based on what's in them. I would definitely go ahead and give that a go. I would say they would freeze nicely if you seal them well for up to a couple of months.
Okay.
You just kind of take them out as you need them. For storage, I would definitely store them in the fridge in a tightly sealed container because otherwise they're just going to be really soft at room temperature. And they're really tasty right out of the fridge. I actually like them that way. But if you want to kind of take them out a little bit to let them soften slightly, that's up to you too. You'll kind of get to know like, oh, I kind of like them this temperature. I mean, everybody's kind of got a different way of enjoying them. But yeah, definitely storing them in the fridge is the way to do it.
Great.
Okay, so there is my strained jam. You can see, look at all those seeds. And I think that's the other thing about, like, when I say a 3/4 cup, how many seeds are in that 3/4 cup will make a difference in how much jam you can strain out, if that makes sense. So be kind of like willing to heat up some more jam if you feel like you need it.
Sure.
Okay.
Holmgren's threw a comment in the chat that heating the lingonberry actually helps it spread in the cookies. And so they said the heating is a helpful tip no matter what.
Good. Yeah, I can see that. It is a little harder to scoop it in if you're working with something cold. I'm going to just grab a teaspoon. Clean again, because we've all been to baking school and we know that we need clean utensils every time. And then I'm just going to spoon that in. And I can pour here, which is nice. And it's just like a nice little jewel in the center of our cookie.
Beautiful.
Just gorgeous. So again, I'm probably not going to eat that right this second because I want that jam to set up again and cool. Okay. And I'll just let them sit at room temperature for a while. If you would like to expedite it, you could pop them in the fridge to help that happen. But really, like when I'm spooning this in, it's probably a half spoonful per cookie. It's not that much.
And it looks like it's making that sort of little almost dome shape, but it's not going higher than the edge of the cookie. Is that right?
Exactly. So like when I come down here, it's just sort of a little, but it's not coming up above because then it would just start to run down the side.
Got it.
And if I were going to serve these like to guests, or if I was just feeling like being extra nice to myself, once they were completely cool, I might sprinkle a little powdered sugar on them because it looks nice. But yeah, if you do that now, it'll just integrate.
It'll dissolve right in.
Yeah, it'll just dissolve right in. So that's another thing you kind of have to wait to do once everything is cool. Okay, so those look awesome. You are going to just love these. They kind of remind me of peanut butter and jelly in a way. They just, because walnuts, that's just so delicious. So any other questions before I just briefly come back to those no-bake cookies?
Jim and Kathleen asked if chocolate is historically a Scandinavian flavor.
That's a really good question. I mean, you see it in baked goods, but not as many as you do in some other cultures, I feel like. And I feel when I do research most of the time about ingredients that seem kind of interesting in Scandinavia, say, for example, cardamom, which is, obviously a big part of Scandinavian baking, but not native to Scandinavia. Most of those items were procured by the Vikings while they were sort of doing their Far East travels, so to speak.
Okay.
So they actually brought back a lot of different sort of unique flavors from their travels. And I would not be surprised if chocolate would not have been one of those things as well. But I'm kind of guessing. Okay, that looks awesome. So now I have a dozen of those. And I am happy, and I'll see you guys later. No, I'm just kidding. I gotta let these cool. I'm gonna go make some coffee, and I'll see you later.
You're gonna have your fika.
Talk about those other cookies real quick. I know we're over by a few minutes, but let's just go back to these real fast.
Absolutely.
Okay.
I'd rather finish the cookies than leave people in the lurch.
And you can, like, I pretty much told you everything you need to know. But just one other thing, if you're crazy person like me, I mean, I'm photographing my food all the time. And so I'm always thinking about appearance. And I remember when I made these the first time, I was a little frustrated that I couldn't get them perfectly round because they're soft right now at room temperature. And I can only get them so round. And that was another thing where I found that, you know, making them into a rough ball, I could pop them in the fridge. And then in a little bit, when they weren't like completely hard, but they had sort of hardened up some, I could take them out and then kind of give them another rough, you know, roll, and they would be a little bit round. So if this is important to you, and let's be honest, it's not, unless you're taking photos, something to think about. One other tip is that if you do chill this mixture and you want to roll it in like your sprinkles or your pearl sugar, it won't stick as well unless it's warmed up a bit. So it's all a real trick, and getting that like temperature is just so. You're probably better off just rolling them kind of warm like they are right now, just accepting the fact that they're not going to be a perfect circle, and just finishing them and enjoy.
This feels like a good moment to embrace the imperfections of life at an early age.
Yes, exactly. Don't be me. Just enjoy those odd shapes and eat them up. They will be delicious.
I love it. Holmgrens are asking, have you ever tried the thumbprints with chocolate, or is that a recipe for delicious disaster?
Oh, I like your thinking. I think that would be fabulous. Hazelnut and chocolate. Who doesn't love that? No, I'm all for it. I say I give it a try. That sounds amazing.
So both of these cookies are ones where there's really no wrong answer. As long as you're starting with the right base, then you can sort of freewheel and improvise using the stuff that you have at hand.
Exactly. And I love the recipes like that, you know, where you can kind of play a little bit in your own kitchen. I think that one of the recipes that I adapted the hazelnut cookie from did have a lemon curd filling to begin with. Nice. So that is definitely something that's been tried and is out there. But yeah, play, have a good time, do your mise en place, all of those fun things. One other tip, and this is probably going to become obvious to you as you're making these, make the balls and then do your rolling, like do all your balls and then do all your rolling, because otherwise you're going to have sprinkles all over your fingers. And unless you have a buddy and you have a person who can do the rolling and then somebody who can do the sprinkles, then you can do it all at once. But
so you can do assembly line with multiple family members helping.
If you don't have an assembly line, then maybe do one activity and then the other.